All right. So many years ago, I come to Homeboy Industries, and I'm I have all these different beliefs. These values, principles that we live by that were taught growing up, and they're embedded in us, and one of them is never get called out of your name. So anyway, I'm there, and there's a leader there, and very interesting, fascinating leader. And I would always watch the way that he would gracefully carry himself, amongst the community. And, he just had really good energy, and he just seemed like he carried so much wisdom. So one day, he gets called out of his name. Someone calls him a bitch. And he's outside smoking a cigarette, standing against the wall. And I go up to him and I say, "Hey, homie, why you let that vato call you that?" And he takes a pull from the cigarette and blows out the smoke, and he says, "When I go home, my kids call me dad, homie." He takes another pull out the cigarette, and he says, "My lady calls me babe." And I thought that was so fascinating. He was so calm, cool, and collective. And I kind of wanted to be like him, in that moment. I wanted to be unshaken by things that once rattled me. And so I now want to welcome that homie. He's sitting here with me, and it's an honor to sit with you. And, this is the Say Less podcast, and I want to welcome Fabian Devora.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
So
I remember that story, and I think, in order to get to that place, it takes a lot of healing and a lot of commitment, and once you start to grow from within and you start to have these spiritual awakenings and recognizing what really matters, it becomes that much easier to be able to let go of those so-called labels or those non-believed statements, because deep down inside, I know who I really am, and I know the truth of who I am. And then you start to really think about the person who's calling me out of my name and what they may be going through, because it's really not about me. Yeah, but at the same time, it is true. It's like I ain't got time to have to prove a point. As long as I get home and my kids call me daddy and my wife calls me babe, to me, that's what's important.
that's right.
And I'm not going to allow anyone to derail me from that.
That's right.
Because I've been my worst enemy. I'm my own worst enemy, and I put myself through so much, and not to give someone else the power to take me there. Yeah.
That wasn't always the case, though, right?
It wasn't always the case. Of course not. At one time in your life, that's a no-no. You would not even, you'll barely roll out the name out of your mouth before you're already taking flight. But
so tell me a little bit about that, growing up in the projects and, raised up in the environments that we're raised up in and the culture that we are baptized in, Well, tell me a little bit about that.
I think, it all begins, when you're loss of identity, right? I'm a first generation Mexican American. Both my parents are from Juarez, Chihuahua, border town to El Paso, Texas. And so I know that, they migrated to Los Angeles for bigger and greater opportunity. And so that's where it also begins, trying to make sense of your place.
Did you always feel that when you were young?
Well, I think it was once we left El Paso because my grandmother was the one who was the one consoling, that gave me the safety, the one that gave me my existence.
How old were you when you left?
I was 5 years old, bro, and I think we came here in 1980 into the projects. And, once you leave that safety zone, which is grandma, abuelita, something shifts.
Did she stay in El Paso?
Abuelita stayed in El Paso, and but something shifted in me, But then you ask yourself, well, what can go wrong? You're with your parents, not knowing what's to come. But in that case, for me, in the projects in the '80s, lack of resources, decade of violence, crack cocaine epidemic, Ronnie King trials. That was nothing compared to El Paso. It was bigger, faster. More tension, and the innocence gets rattled.
When you were a kid, were you well aware of things, or was it natural? Was it normal?
No, well, I think it was, I think I leaned on my father a lot, because my jefito was my safety. That's the man that I looked up to and admire, but also later, then he made some choices that robbed me of him, his love and affection.
But at that time, he
was my, the one that I felt safe with, you know. My mother as well, but mainly my father, because he was a tall man, and he always called me his king, mi rey, véngase mi rey, todo pa mi rey, everything for my little king. you know, not knowing that the crown will be removed eventually due to the turmoils of the barrios or in the environments we grew up in.
Yeah.
You had to make some tough choices, right?
At what point did that start happening?
That started like at the age of 5, 6, you know, right when we got there, maybe about 6 years old, I think he started to challenge his own manhood, knowing that he couldn't provide as an immigrant, finding himself in dead end after dead end. And the love that he had for my mother was slowly fading away or was fragmented. Because my dad was he was a gentleman, man. And I remember as a kid, he would come home from work, dusty from construction, and he would always greet my mom with a kiss. Venga, vieja. Kiss, and then he'll give her his check. Aliviánate. We'll get ready. We're going to go out. You know, that was my pops.
Yeah.
Always loving my mother. And then when we came to the projects or left El Paso, it started fading away. That love and affection he had for my mom was no longer. So then, you know, you're trying to make sense of it, but you have no coping skills, bro. You're only 5 years old, and you're just like, okay, well, I guess, you know. But slowly, it builds itself up to know that it's different. Like, okay, it ain't the same anymore. You start feeling it.
And that was around 5 or 6?
5 and 6 years old, because the same love you have for me, I can see that when we arrived to Los Angeles, you know, it was faster, more demand, and I knew that the love he had for my mother and the affection and also like the attention he would give me was slowly fading away, you know, and I think it was from him trying to figure things out, trying to fend and provide for his family.
Did he have anybody, you think, in his life?
Oh, absolutely not. You know, I didn't know this until later. You know, I start to ask questions, you know, once I got into my healing, my recovery. Because, you know, it's easier to blame people. You know that. You can blame, because of you, Dad, because of you, Mom. That's the easy way. But, you know, and that's because we also don't have coping mechanism or making sense or the time to even understand. We don't have those knowledge or educational formalities, right? So it's easy to blame, you know, and throw people away, you know. And so eventually, as I got clean, sober, you know, I started to learn a little bit more about my father, and I realized that he met his once, you know, and that would be my grandfather.
Okay.
And so then I didn't even know who
okay.
he was.
So
I didn't even
he met his dad
probably
one time.
once or twice, and then I didn't even know he was my grandfather. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if I didn't see him as my grandfather, I
Imagine
knew
his son,
Yeah, imagine him. So then it all comes to, I get it now. Once it like the recovery and all that.
You know what's the trip is, like, a person can only take so much, huh?
Right.
They can only endure so much, and that could be for anything. Like, you know, some people choose violence, some people choose drugs, some people even they shut down. Absolutely. I've known, I've known people that have migrated, which is a migration. It's not illegal because it's been happening for thousands of years on this continent. And but when they come here to this society that's structured as it is, like, I have my father-in-law who just didn't talk anymore. They just stopped talking, homie. They just have so much pain, so much hurt that only they know what they've been through.
Absolutely.
So much loss. Working from being little kids, you know, and you work for all these things, but then you lose your children to gang violence, or you lose your relationship because all you do is work. You become a workaholic. Or your children, they start to get involved with gangs or drugs. You know, it's just so many things. But at a certain point, there's a breaking point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was that breaking point for your pops?
I mean, when we talk about what it is like I remember when my mother and I started to make these choices myself, right? And I start to see my father going in and out of incarceration, leaving me behind for 3 to 4 years, go do a term, and having to see my mother in despair, crying, weeping at night, wondering how she's going to make ends meet. And I'm the oldest, and now I'm feeling like obligated to help my mom, but I'm only 6 and 7 years old. Like, there's not much one can do, but then you start to blame yourself, and then you start to question, like, damn, like, why am I even born? Like, am I a bother? You know, because you start to see the distress. Then you ask for, like, the Nikes, or, Mom, I want a starter jacket. It's like, mijo, how? How? I don't have no money. So then you stop asking. And then you start thinking, well, damn, am I a bother? Or, like, am I even supposed to be here? So those things start to run.
At what age did that happen?
That starts like 7, 12, 10. You know, I remember I was 10 years old, 11 years old when I started to try to, you know, find that identity, right? You know, it was during the hip hop era, the break dancing. So I wanted the, you know, the fat shoelaces with the Adidas and that fly gear, you know, and My mother couldn't afford it, bro. She just had to make ends meet somehow, some way. And to be honest with you, we were on welfare. You know, she was getting her little first and 15 check, and then surviving with that. And pops in prison, so you know. And then me asking her for these things only added more pressure. You know what I'm saying? So then you just kind of shut down yourself, right? And then you start to blame your dad, like, damn, dad, because of you. You know? And that's when the resentment kicks in. And then you start to lose respect for that man that you admire or that you love, in this case my father. And then that's not enough, so then you start looking at mother kind of weird too, you know what I mean? And then you start to, like you said, shut down. You're like, you know what, nah, miss me with all that, because that's when you're starting to become hardened and you know, I'm not going to feel these emotions, and no, I'm going to make sure I'm seen, and you're going to see me, whether it's negative or whether it's violent. Oh, no, you're going to see me, you know? And that's how it just gradually becomes that, right?
And at that, like, what age would you say then you were like, fuck it?
I think it was at the age of 12, you know. I would say that the age of 12, by 10, 11, I started experimenting with a little weed. And I think I was just, all I wanted to do was, like, I found the gift of art at a young age. So I just wanted to create, you know. I wanted to, like, really be seen in one way or another. But it wasn't be seen at the time. It was just like, look, I'm here.
Emotion,
yeah, I'm here. Like, look at me. And so I did graffiti art, you know. So I would go to the Alley River, express myself, but considered to be vandalism, you know, the rush from running from the police. That starts to become like a little addiction, you know. And then later you go to the Levitt's yard, the panic zone, and I'm catching buses at the time, far away. Mother's like, ¿Dónde andas? You know, where you been?
Yeah.
So to me, that was like my freedom, my escape, almost like my escape.
A relief,
Actually, from everything that I was experiencing. But yet, then again, it was frowned upon, right?
Yeah.
So constantly finding myself.
Demonized,
frowned upon, waste of time, don't write on walls, where are you going, you know. So being told not to do what you love to do the most only discourages you even more. And you get more, like, amplified, you know. Like, the more you say no to me, the more I'm going to do this, right. You know. That's usually what takes place. Not knowing that it's self-destructive behavior, and eventually you're going to pay the price.
Yeah.
But then you build on that.
That day eventually comes, but at that time, you
don't really care about really.
No, you don't. And like what you were saying, you know, you welcome it kind of.
Yeah.
You go, all this comes with it. It's a package deal. Well, I want it sooner than later.
Right.
You know, you start chasing death, right?
No, absolutely. And then at the end of the day, you know, if that's the case, then you start. That's when you start to lose a sense of hope, a sense of belonging. Then you start to just like, oh, well, if this is what it is, then I'm going to be good at it, whatever it is, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's gang banging, whether it's whatever, right?
And then things get progressively worse,
and then progressively worse. And then you get into one thing after another, and then after another, and you just got to somehow figure your way out of it. If that's the case or not, you just go right through it. And, you know?
And so, being that resentment starting to build for your dad, and being that you're feeling these powerful emotions, right? And you say, fuck it. At what point was the relationship with your dad eventually damaged completely?
Yeah, I think it was when, you know, because I loved my dad, and I felt very betrayed by him, to be honest with you, because in the end of the day, you are my safety, Dad. Like, I was your king. You called me your rey. You gave me the crown, homie, and now you're taking it away. And I couldn't make sense what it was. But then he became a drug addict. You know, he himself was a drug dealer, later to become a drug addict. So now I'm like, wow, this vato just choosing drugs over me. And so it's all that, right? And so at one point, when I think it was his last term, I was about 13, 14. And I used to hate waking up at 3 in the morning when my mother waking us up, get in the car and drive to Tehachapi, Ironwood, Corcoran, Delano. Like, I knew all the prisons, and I didn't even go and do a shoot term or a term, but I knew exactly where we were going. Wasco, Delano, Tehachapi, Ironwood, you know. And he would try to make up for it. I ain't gonna lie. Pops would send me a letter once a week with a little drawing on it, you know, the little envelopes. And so it'll make me smile, but
it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. That's great, but I don't have you, Dad. You know, that was that. And so I think for me, it was around that age of 13, 12. I remember one time he told me, we were in Tehachapi in the visiting, and then he pulled me to the side. We went and got the vending machine. You know, he goes, vente, mijo. Let's go get a burrito. So we walked to the vending machine. And he goes, I don't want you to join gangs. Your mom's telling me you're hanging out with gang members, con los cholos. And then I say, and what does it matter to you? And he goes, God. And he couldn't do anything. He's in prison.
Yeah, so you know,
he can't like,
you know you're
I'm
safe,
like, you're
homie.
not gonna do shit.
Yeah.
The towers are right there,
know
but that was
safe,
me
yeah.
being a little rebellious
Yeah,
one, right?
yeah.
So he's like, I go, and so he took, and what? And then he goes, what do you mean what? Don't talk to me like that. Trying to be cordial because they're, you know, they get the yard.
Him, yeah.
And then I said, look, Dad, the minute you leave heroin is the minute that I'll stop walking that path.
Damn, you told him just like that.
Like that in Spanish, and he didn't like it. I'm pretty sure he wished he could slap the shit out of me.
Of course, yeah. Because at the end of the day, you're still your dad, and that's how they were raised,
and
right?
A little rage, and then he just like, okay, está bien. Like, okay, it's cool. But you know inside he was like, ooh,
yeah,
you said the
you're
wrong
lucky,
thing.
homie, yeah.
And you're lucky, but okay. But I think
And you were about 13 or 14?
Yeah, and I think, and then I was, we were visiting, and then my mom's like, ¿Qué trae este? And, no, déjalo, leave him. Leave him. But it was that leave him, that he wants to walk.
Let him go.
Let him.
Damn.
Like saying like,
Yeah.
déjalo.
Yep.
He wants to be a little smarter, let him. You know,
Damn.
but only he knew what that path looked like.
Of course.
But he couldn't rectify. He knew already that he was in a situation where he had lost his power, because in the end of the day, the respect's no longer there. And so imagine
That's
what
a
it did to
pivotal
him.
moment, homie,
Yeah, imagine what it did to him walking back into that cell, you know, knowing that he no longer has my love and respect in that moment. And so I think that's when it began, and eventually it just led into this path.
That's a pivotal moment.
And then, you know, the thing about it is, like, you know, the more it's interesting how you start to, like, become resentful, but then you say, man, when I grow up, I'm never going to be like that, like my dad. But gradually, unconsciously, you look in the mirror and you start to resemble your father. That's the cycle.
I like to say, everything that I hated, I became.
Yeah, you see? Ain't that trippy?
Homie, I remember growing up, and I would see even the way that Vatos would treat my mother. I would see the older homies that I despised, the ones that brought fear into my home, you know what I mean? And then even as I got older and I went to prison, and I would walk the yard, and I would say it. I'll never be that Vato right there.
Mm-hmm.
And on my second term, I remember having to look myself. I'm in the hole, a little tiny square, and I look at myself. I go, who the fuck are you? Everything that I hated, homie, I became. That was hard.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, homie, we have these moments, you know, because, you know, deep down inside, you know, we're not bad people.
No.
You know, and I think, you know, I remember all the love and the affection my abuelita, my grandmother, gave me. And that's what I hold too.
Yeah.
But for some odd reason, I store it away. You know, we store it away because that's something that you don't want to reveal or can't, because now we're in this survival mode. And now we live in this lifestyle that we have to sustain. And some of that has to be stored away because it's not welcomed as much. It's pending if you're trying to.
Like, it's not useful.
It's not useful.
It's not useful, and it's at times can be dangerous, actually.
Absolutely.
You know, and I remember this other moment I'll share with you because you're making me think about it. When my jefa died, I got the letter came through the cell door, and I got it, and I remember just glancing at her obituary, and I look at it, and I could feel the pain. I could feel it starting, and I went like this, and I stuffed it back into the envelope, and I put it away. And as I looked back on my life and reflected, like all the love, all the patience, all the vulnerability, you know, all these different things that was shown, was taught, and also even in our culture,
Absolutely.
it was stuffed completely down. It was like that envelope that was stuffed into the locker, never to be revealed.
Right.
Because it was dangerous, you know, or like you said, there was no space for that, homie.
No, especially in the lifestyle
There
you're
just
in.
wasn't.
It's just, I mean, you know.
And so, but speaking of that, can you remember a time when you're looking back, you know, you've been to the county and you've done time, or, you know, you've been alone, and was there ever that battle?
Oh, absolutely, dog. The best moments of my life in the county jail or in lockup was when I was me, my mattress, and my pillow.
Okay.
Because there's no one there but you and your God, or the only hope or the glimmer of hope that you have. You don't have to perform when the lights go out.
That's right.
You can be there with yourself and your spirit, and there I will find the most beautiful moments when I would say, I swear, Creator, God, give me this quebrada, homie. When I get out, I'm going to try my best to do what's right by my wife, my children. But porfa, food, this addiction. And I would just have the best conversations in that moment. Then wake up. The armor goes back up like nothing happened. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's why I said, you know, when they lights out, head on the pillow, body on the mattress, use that time. Because in that moment is when it's between you and you with you, dog.
You with you.
Everything else shuts down. You know? You don't have to perform.
Yeah.
You know, or not, I don't know if you have to perform, but it is right
but
because we do. We
put the mask on.
Yeah, we have to.
As soon as that cell door opens up, even before it opens up, as soon as you get out of that bed, the mask is on.
And those were those moments.
But it's those conversations, though. Yeah. The conversations of you with you. That's where I think that the transformation happens, homie.
It begins, and at least you at least know that you're not losing full sight of who and you are and was taught and was given by those loved ones that really do care. My abuelita's voice, my abuelito's voice, my mother's prayers, all that will come to light when the lights were out. Ain't that a trip?
Did you know, another thing too about being in there, and this was for me, and I don't know if this was the same case for you, but I always knew that I was indigenous. And we didn't call it indigenous back then, and I'm doing it for the sake of where we're at in our current state, but we were Indians. We called ourselves that, which was a word that was given to us by a colonizer. But growing up, we knew it, and there was shame around it, homie. There was so much shame around it, you know, that we were, because there's two cultures that exist, you know, it's our true culture, and then you have these subcultures, right? The subculture, the gang culture. And, you know, to call yourself that, and I remember I had one cousin that was proud of it. He had kind of semi-transformed his life from being a gang member, and he had grown his hair, and he was in ceremony, and he would teach us songs as kids. But then we would go out to the street and be like, we're not going to talk about that shit, homie. We're not going to be putting the sage on us right here, you know. We would do it maybe in the yard. But I'm saying all that to say this. When I was locked up, something inside of me, it just kept on, like, learn your culture. Learn who you are. I had different moments like that in my life. Did you ever have that moment where your spirit will speak to you?
I you know, and that's sad. That's sadly to say that, you know, my parents or my mother and father didn't really transmit any of that knowledge to me. I had to kind of discover it by other homies, other people, you know, and I was so disconnected, you know, on where we come from, who we are, our values.
Where did you start getting that?
I got that initially from my homies, which we called the ITS crew, Inside the Skull, Indigenous Torturing Spaniards. There was a rap group.
Indigenous Torturing Spaniards?
Yeah, and these were like little acronyms that they came up with, ITS. There were rappers. That my brother, Dario, was part of that group. And my homie, Azul, Chato, and so on. There was a little group of homies that just did music in my mama's studio in the laundry room, recording. And then, you know, I was the one that was like, según yo, you know, the gang member, the one that was just in the midst. And then they started to introduce me to, like, I would hear their lyrics, and they're speaking on the, you know, the Mayans, the Toltecs, and the Aztecs, and and I'm just like, then it kicked up curiosity, right? And I saw how amazing they would flow, and then Darkman, and then would take the time, like, you know, you know who Xochipitli is, you know where Tenochtitlan is, you know what the Acan is. And I'm like, nah, I don't. You know what I mean?
Interesting. How old were you?
I was already like in my 20s, 17s. But before that, because that was already there, I had a curiosity. But then Robert Murillo, which I call my uncle, he is from the Southern Door Lodge, and he had a connection with Turtle Hawk from the Shumash.
But how'd you come across him?
Well, Robert Murillo, because he is the uncle of my son, Fabian Jr.
Oh, got you.
And then he will bring us, the same little group, will take us to the rest. And we'll go to TAF. And I remember one time he said, all right, all of you, vámonos. Let's get out of here. You guys going with me 2 weeks. And where we going? Just let them know you're going to be safe, and let's go. And so we're rolling, and we end up in TAF. And we end up in the rest. And that's when I met Turtle Hawk, Shumash. And now we're in the reservation. And I'm like, hey, what are we going to do? He goes, don't trip, fool. I've been here before. You're going to like it. Just be open to it, homie. And Turtle Hawk comes, and he goes, how you doing? These are your nephews? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, all right, this is what I'm going to say. don't come up here and try to be mischievous. If you think you're lying to someone or you think you're sneaky, don't do that. Sacred land, it has eyes. There's spirit. So think you're sneaky. I don't have to watch you guys. Just know that. And then I like, so that in itself was like, damn, okay, you know.
Right, yeah.
But then slowly I start to realize, he said, okay, nephews, come. Go get the wood. Find the best wood. And so we'll go out to the thing, get the wood, bring it back. Goes, is that good wood? I mean, come on. Is that good wood? Go take it back and find dry wood. And so we didn't know what he was doing. But to make a long story short, he began to teach us and the discipline, the importance of ceremony, how the fire tenders are the most important part of the ceremony, for we are keeping the toncas in the heat, and the prayer begins with us.
Yeah.
And so I felt important, like, oh, the fire tender?
Yeah.
I'm a fire tender? He goes, yeah, you are, everything you're thinking, your prayers begin but when you begin the fire. And that, whatever you're bringing in there, is going to go into ceremonia. So you got to be mindful, nephews. So positive thoughts.
So you're around 17, early 20s?
Yeah, it's like 17, 18.
18,
Yeah,
okay.
and then I was like, orale. So then the powwow came. People from all corners of different Lakotas.
different nations.
Different nations start pulling up. And then, we were bringing in the tonka. And so in the end of the day, we realized that, fire tending, it's a beautiful discipline, because if it is about ceremony, then what fire are you willing to tend? We first must tend to the internal fire, which is you, and your immediate fire, which is familia. And that is where the prayer begins for the external, which is community. And so those teachings start to make sense, right? They start to penetrate and pierce. Then I start to learn about more about the Shumach, and Turtle Hawk will tell the stories. And then I say, wow, we've been told otherwise.
Yeah.
you know what I'm
start to
saying?
realize,
Yeah,
homie.
and then I say, what am I doing? And that's when it started shifting, what are we doing? We learned about the genocides, and then I start to understand, why are we killing one another? These are your brothers. It just start to make a lot of sense, and the pictures start to get clearer.
Clear, homie.
And I say, oh, no, I don't want to contribute to that.
But at this time, you're a gang member.
Yeah, I'm still banging, and now he's...
But now it's impacting you.
Yeah, now it's taking me to this other knowledgeable thing about spirituality and creator, and we're one with the land, and you're important, nephew, and your spirit, all that.
It has
all
you
those
questioning
teachings.
things now.
Yeah, and then it made me realize, this is it. Where you been? This is what I need.
Damn.
And from that point, we went back up to and then I started getting more involved, sweat lodging, and I walked up folks to the Vision Quest, and I'm understanding the whole.
And at the same time, are you battling?
Yeah, at the same time, I'm
addiction.
still battling my addiction,
Okay.
and I think that's why Uncle Bobby would take us up there to try to pluck us out of the city, away from alcohol, drugs, and all that. And for at least those 2 weeks, we will get moments of clarity.
Yeah.
But the addiction's strong, bro, and methamphetamine especially, that's the drug of choice that I was involved. And so I not only was I embraced by the love and the care of my abuelitos, those teachings, Catholicism, because that's what they believed in, and then understanding our cultura, our ancestral lineages, and those teachings and the medicinal elements that holds for our people and has been transcended from centuries.
Yeah.
So that's fueling me. Me as an artist, my own exploration and creating, that's fueling me. But I still had a drug problem.
Okay.
And so I still challenge creator, you know what, even though all this is good, you're still not here.
Yeah.
You're not answering my prayers, so it's still that.
Or why? Why all this pain?
And then I'm
why
thinking, all this
hurt?
beautiful, I hear you, I see it,
Yeah.
I feel it, but I'm still addict.
Yeah.
And meth is still stronger.
Okay.
So I would challenge him, I hear you, dog, but you're still not helping me. And I think I wanted that prayer to be answered so bad, but little did I know that it was already being answered by these teachings and introductions of these folks that he was putting in front of me. It was just me who wasn't able to embrace it.
Gotcha.
So then I said, as I start to fight this internal struggle of identity or addiction, or just trying to find myself, trying to reclaim who I am amongst this subcultures and everything else, and realizing that I have now become my father, I didn't want to be that guy. So I start to say, a voice came to me and said, the only way you can protect your children is if you kill yourself. The only way you can protect your children is if you kill yourself, because I knew the pain that I felt from my father not being in my life, the pain that he instilled in the household because of his addiction. Now I'm that guy, and now I have children, and now I'm doing the same thing. And I knew what that pain felt like. So then I did believe the voice to say, the only way you can protect your children is if you kill yourself. And that's when I tried to commit suicide for the third time.
Okay.
You see, challenging Creator, where you at, where you been, and knowing that I don't want to live, because in the end of the day, I'm no good in a way that is not being healthy for these kids, right? And I'm just a piece of shit, to be honest with you. That's what I felt like, because I'm not being the father to these kids, and now I'm being just like my dad, and that's painful, bro. And I'm that guy now. So the only way you can do this is just kill yourself. That's the only way you can protect them. So I ran across the freeway, bro, and I remember on meth induced, Elizabeth was with me, my kids. I had 3 at the time, Damien, Andrew, and, you know, the oldest ones, and Honesty. And I remember that pain, so I remember running across the freeway. I said, I'm going to kill myself, and this time I'm not going to fail. And so I remember being so induced in meth, and I made a mistake in my household, made a hole in the ceiling. My mother called the police, and I told my mom, I'd rather be dead than to go to prison. And I'm going to kill myself, and this time I'm not going to fail. I remember looking at my mom and pouring out all the love and thank you for everything, without saying words, just putting it out. And I ran. And now I'm running on the 5 South, Hollenbeck, Boyle Heights, Hollenbeck Park, Boyle Heights, the 5 South. I jump on the freeway wall, and I'm walking on the edge of the freeway wall. It's not leading me anywhere. And so I hang from the freeway wall, and when I let go, my knees, the wall's so high that my knees are under my jaw. I bit my tongue, ripped open, practically bit it off. And I remember walking outside of the road, broken, spiritual warfare, demonic voices, kill yourself, you worthless piece of shit, kill yourself. And then you hear, no, mijo, think beautiful thoughts. And it was so amplified in my head, taunting and scaring, that I remember shutting my ears. And I looked towards the sky and I said, F you, God. And in that moment, I ran across the freeway. And I ran. And now I'm in the third lane, first lane, second lane, third lane, and I'm getting a realization. Like, oh, I'm in the freeway. I'm about to get killed. The truck is coming at a distance. It's not stopping. It's getting closer. I clench my fist. I twist my body as if waiting for the impact of the truck. And then I remember looking up and I said, my kids. Last cry for help. And then that moment, there was this beautiful gust of wind. Boom. I felt the impact. Hit my chest so hard in the center divider, and then I heard, it's like, the fuck? The truck did not hit me. So I'm sitting on the center divider, I looked towards the sky, and I saw the sun rays dancing beautifully, and I received the feelings of peace, joy, happiness, and serenity, the feelings that can only come from something much more greater than myself. Well, that day, I learned and understood that every son must return to his father. Well, that day I did. And it was the thought of your children, the purpose why you get to live, a sense of rebirth. And maybe every son must return to his father. Maybe my father was just a symbolic image of who I had to forgive as a wisdom. But for me, whatever that did was to allow me to know that there is something after this. It's a spiral. There is something beyond this, and that gave me enough courage to go get the help, and that's when I went to rehab and got the help. And from that point on, it's when I realized that there is nothing, and I know life is life and it will show up, but I also know that there is something after this. From my experience, I do believe that I am being watched and seen by something much more greater than myself, and if God, Creator, could see me through this, what else can He not see me through? And then, and that's when everything changed from that point. And that's why it makes it difficult for people to get me out of character or move me, because I'm standing firm
in that truth.
In that truth, homie.
Yeah.
And if the truck did not hit me, no one else is going to have the privilege to. You get me what I'm saying?
Get you.
And it's sometimes hard for people to believe, but it's an experience. And people say, why are you so calm? And you know what I say? I say, maybe I did pass away. Maybe the truck took the old me and allowed me to live. And that's why I'm so calm, connected, and walking a big, strong, firm belief that there is something greater than myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I have so much faith in that way, you know, and I do believe it's a ceremony and everything that I was taught. It all makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting because, you know, I work with what I need at that given time.
Okay.
And I know sometimes it's like, well, you know, what the Catholics did to our people, and, you know, I get that.
Yeah.
But I'm also not going to allow for my mother's belief in La Virgen de Guadalupe to be derailed, you know, because she did something for my mother.
Yeah.
She got her through those trials and tribulations and that darkness.
Yeah.
So there must be some power there.
Yeah.
And if you want to call it that, then I see my mother in the eyes of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
And to me, that's okay. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't take away from the indigenous,
Yeah, it
the
doesn't.
traditions, and everything that I've experienced, because I put the red road first and foremost.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to give my respects to those images or those beliefs that helped see my
Absolutely.
mother and my family through, and that's okay.
Well, somebody told me once, they said, homie, either God is everything or God is nothing, homie.
Right.
There's no in between. And all these things, too, I find myself doing the same thing. I never knew about St. Jude. I never knew about the Virgen. I knew that they were there. My grandma had the statues
Right.
of them, and she had a little bowl of water with pennies in there. Every day she would go off the porch, every day, and she'll throw the water off the porch, and she'll fill it back up and put it right there by the Virgen, and then she would have either St. Jude or she would have Jesus, you know. And trip on this, homie, this is a true story. I used to always, like, you know, just seeing her, like, what is she doing? But never asked her. Because, you know, we're not thinking like that.
Yeah.
But when she died, I had so many questions. Hey, homie, I had so many questions. I'm in a sweat lodge ceremony, dog. It's going around, and I'm praying in there, and I'm, like, missing her, and I'm praying. She's gone now. She passed. And I'm just thinking, like, Grandma, you know, like, man, talk to me. Like, I want to just know, like, I want to hear from you. You know how they go around the prayers?
Yeah.
All right. It's going around. People are praying for their families. They're praying for everything they're praying for. It gets to this one vato, and he's praying, and he goes, yeah, you know, I just want to give a lot of love and respect to my tia, because she loves us so much that every night, every day, she would have water in the pad. And that she prayed all the energy, all the negative energy would go into that water. And she said that every day, every morning, she would get up to throw the energy, negative energy out of her pad. And she would fill it up, and she would put it back again and do it every single day. That's how much she loved us. And I'm sitting right there, homie, and I'm just crying because I'm thinking, now I had the answer
To
why she did that. And she
doing.
did it with the Virgen. And I'm in a sweat lodge ceremony, and I'm learning what that was about.
She's speaking.
She
through
was
other
speaking,
folks.
but I said to say everything was connected, you know. And then you're mentioning the fire, and I'm at a ceremony, and I come out, I'm drying off, and there's this elder, and he says about the fire, what you said. He goes, hey, that's a powerful ceremony right there, huh? Yeah, it's hot. He goes, it's powerful ceremony. He says, you know what other ceremony is just as important as that one? I go, nah, which one? He said, the one in your home. You know, I'm like, man, all these lessons that even as you're talking, the truth, because the truth is powerful, is resonating with me, like, because it's always teaching us, you know, that we're still not there. We're on this road, we're on this path, but there's still things, you know. There's still, like you said, there's still things that need to die, homie.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely, and I continue to live in that practice, you know, the tending to the fire, because it's almost like life, you know. And in the world, you're gonna have folks who are not quite there yet. Everyone's in their own journey.
Yeah.
And you have to step back and ask yourself, what fire do you want to tend? It's almost like pick and choose your battles. You know, do you want to take the energy and tend to your internal fire and what it's doing for you? Or do you want to give your energy to something that may not be healthy for you?
Yeah.
So it's almost like turning to the fire, picking the right wood, making sure that you know what's going to benefit you, your
Yeah.
immediate family, and then the external community.
That's right.
And if you use that same practice in life, it gets a lot much
It
easier.
does, homie.
You don't take things too personal.
It does.
Yeah, so,
And,
but
yeah.
it's interesting how those things can really influence you and your life and your journey.
Absolutely.
It's medicine,
It's
bro.
medicine, homie.
Absolutely.
And with that, you know, I just want to thank you for coming on. And thank
Absolutely.
you for imparting this wisdom. And,
Yeah.
you know, and also just I want to thank you for being who you are. You
No,
know,
thank
being
you.
allowing your light to shine, because over the years I've learned so much from you.
Yeah.
And even till this present time, you know, when I'm around you, I just get so much clarity.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? It's like you always shine the light on the path. So
Well, you already know, the feeling's always mutual, right? We're always learning. There's always something to learn, and we don't have all the answers. And that's why if we're open to each other and as brothers and sisters and whoever, then we can walk in strength.
Yeah.
You know? And so thank you for your knowledge, your wisdom, and what you bring to, because it's a two-way street, carnal. And you teach me, I learn things, or I'm reminded of things, when I think I may know something, it humbles you. So, it's always good to have a mirror image like that.
thank you, Carnal. Thank
Right.
you so much.
Have a good one.